You open the news today, you see the same headlines: missile strikes, drone attacks, emergency meetings, rising oil prices, and growing fears of a regional war. But here's the big question. Is this simply a war between Iran and Israel? Or is this part of a much larger geopolitical struggle? Because what we are witnessing is not just two countries fighting. The tension is spreading across multiple Middle Eastern nations. Armed groups are becoming active. Global powers are taking sides. Markets are reacting. Oil prices are fluctuating. In this video, we'll break it down logically and calmly. Why are Iran and Israel enemies? What role does the United States play? Why are Arab countries involved or affected? And could this escalate into something even bigger? Let's go step by step. Pushpin Chapter 1. The Origins of the Rivalry. 1979 Iranian Revolution. Interestingly, Iran and Israel were not always enemies. Before 1979, Iran, under the Shah, maintained diplomatic and economic relations with Israel. There was cooperation, intelligence sharing, and trade. Everything changed in 1979 with the Islamic Revolution in Iran. After the revolution, Iran's new leadership adopted a strong ideological position against both the United States and Israel. Israel was viewed as a symbol of Western influence in the Middle East. From that point onward, Iran declared opposition to Israel as part of its foreign policy. But instead of direct war, Iran began supporting anti-Israel armed groups in the region, such as Hezbollah, Lebanon, Hamas, Gaza. Israel saw this as a direct security threat. This is how the long-running proxy conflict began. Pushpin Chapter 2. The Nuclear Issue, the Core Fear. One of the biggest sources of tension is Iran's nuclear program. Iran officially states that its nuclear activities are for peaceful energy production and research. However, Israel believes that if Iran develops nuclear weapons, it would pose an existential threat to Israel's survival. In 2015, a major agreement was signed called the Joint Comprehensive Plan of Action (JCPOA). Under this deal, Iran limited its uranium enrichment. International sanctions were lifted, but in 2018, the United States withdrew from the agreement, and sanctions were reimposed. After that, Iran gradually increased its nuclear enrichment levels again. For Israel, this raised alarm bells. Israel has repeatedly stated that it will not allow Iran to obtain nuclear weapons, even if that means military action. This nuclear fear is one of the biggest drivers of today's escalating tensions. Pushpin Chapter 3. Proxy wars across the region. Iran and Israel rarely fight directly. Instead, they engage through proxy forces. Iran supports various regional actors: Hezbollah in Lebanon, armed militias in Iraq, the Syrian government, the Houthis in Yemen. Israel views these groups as part of Iran's regional expansion strategy. As a result, Israel has conducted airstrikes in Syria and targeted Iranian military infrastructure in neighboring countries. This has turned the Middle East into a complex geopolitical chessboard, where multiple countries and non-state actors are indirectly involved in the conflict. Pushpin Chapter 4. Why does it feel like the entire Middle East is under attack? Recently, tensions have escalated significantly. Missiles and drones are no longer limited to isolated zones. Regional actors are reacting. Borders are becoming unstable. When Iran retaliates, Israel responds. When Israel strikes, Iran-backed groups react. This creates a chain reaction. Shipping routes in strategic areas are threatened. Airspace is close. Military alerts increase across Gulf countries. Even countries that are not directly fighting feel the impact because they are geographically and politically connected. That's why it appears that the entire Middle East is under pressure, not necessarily because every country is fighting, but because the region is deeply interconnected. Pushpin Chapter 5. The role of the United States. It is impossible to understand this conflict without discussing the United States. The U.S. has historically been Israel's strongest ally, providing military aid, advanced defense systems, diplomatic backing. From Washington's perspective, supporting Israel is a strategic priority. However, critics argue that heavy U.S. involvement sometimes intensifies tensions rather than calming them. When American military assets move into the region, other global powers watch closely. And that brings us to the global dimension of the conflict. Pushpin Chapter 6. The Arab world's complicated position. Arab countries are in a difficult situation. On one hand, some governments are wary of Iran's regional ambitions and influence. On the other hand, public opinion in many Arab nations strongly supports the Palestinian cause and criticizes Israel. This creates political complexity. Governments try to avoid full-scale war, maintain economic stability, protect national security, but balancing all of this in a highly polarized region is extremely difficult. That's why diplomatic statements often appear cautious and carefully worded. Pushpin Chapter 7. Impact on Oil and the Global Economy. The Middle East is one of the world's most important energy-producing regions. When instability rises, oil prices increase, global inflation rises, transportation costs go up, food prices increase. This doesn't just affect Europe or America. Developing countries feel the impact even more strongly. Higher oil prices can trigger economic slowdowns worldwide. That's why even countries far away from the conflict are closely monitoring the situation. Pushpin Chapter 8. Could this turn into a world war? This is the question many people are asking. For a true world war scenario to emerge, major global powers would need to directly engage militarily. Large military alliances would need to activate. At the moment, the conflict remains regional. However, the risk of miscalculation is real. History shows that large wars sometimes begin with limited conflicts that spiral out of control. An accidental strike, miscommunication, or political misjudgment could widen the confrontation. But as of now, global powers appear cautious about direct escalation. Pushpin Chapter 9. Is there any possible solution? Long-term peace is difficult because both sides believe their concerns are existential. For Israel, security and survival are non-negotiable. For Iran, regional influence and sovereignty are central priorities. When both sides see the conflict as tied to national survival, compromise becomes politically risky. However, history shows that sustainable peace only comes through diplomacy, negotiations, and mutual agreements, not endless military escalation. War may create temporary deterrence, but it rarely creates permanent stability. Bullseye Final Conclusion. The bigger lesson. The Iran-Israel conflict is not just a military confrontation. It is a historical rivalry, an ideological clash, a nuclear security dilemma, a regional power struggle, a reflection of global geopolitics. Modern wars are not limited to battlefields. They affect energy markets, global trade, political alliances, everyday citizens across the world. Starting a war is often easier than controlling its consequences. And that is why the world is watching the Middle East very carefully right now.